The transplant coordinator told Renee the surgery would take 4 hours. She nodded like it was a routine thing, like she was agreeing to a dental cleaning or a tire rotation, and then she signed her name on the bottom line in her careful, deliberate cursive. The coordinator, a woman named Patrice, who had processed hundreds of these forms, said she had never seen a living donor so calm. What she meant was that most people trembled or second-guessed themselves or asked to call someone first. Renee did none of those things. She folded her hands in her lap, looked at the consent forms one more time, and said she was ready whenever they were. She did not know the man whose life depended on that piece of paper. She had never met him, never spoken to him, did not know his name or his face or the fact that he had a daughter 4 years older than her own. She only knew what the registry had told her: compatible, critical, time-sensitive. That had been enough. What she could not have known, sitting in that plastic chair in the transplant office on a Tuesday afternoon in November, was that the stranger whose name she would never be given was a man named Lawrence Cole. She didn't know that Lawrence Cole had spent the last 18 months on dialysis, that he ran a logistics company with 900 employees, that he had a daughter named Simone who drove 4 hours every weekend to sit beside his hospital bed and hold his hand while the machine did the work his body could no longer do. She did not know any of that. She just knew she was a match, and that someone needed her, and that when the world asks something of you at that scale, you answer. The doctors called it altruistic donation. Renee called it the right thing to do. If you have ever wondered whether one person's quiet decision can change the entire shape of another family's life, stay with this story. The answer lives in what happened next. Renee worked the night shift at a commercial laundry facility on the west side, sorting linens from 3 hotel accounts and a regional hospital chain, 8 hours on her feet, 5 nights a week. She had done the job for 6 years, long enough that her supervisor called her the most reliable person in the building, and long enough that the work had worn a familiar ache into her lower back and both her knees. She was 37 years old. She had a daughter named Chloe, who was 9. She had an apartment with a window that looked into the brick wall of the building next door, and a savings account with enough in it to cover 1 month's expenses if something went wrong, and not quite enough to cover 2. She was not poor in the way that cartoons draw it. She had food, she had heat, she had Chloe in clean clothes and full backpack every morning. She was poor in the way that most of America is poor, which is to say she was one bad piece of luck away from the kind of trouble that does not let go. Her mother had died of kidney disease when Renee was 22. Not the same failure that sends a person to the transplant list, but the slow kind, the kind where the body just wears the organ down over decades of high blood pressure and unmanaged diabetes and not enough money for regular care. Renee had watched it happen over 5 years, had watched her mother get smaller and greyer and more tired, had been there the morning it ended. She had told a co-worker once, in the break room over a cup of vending machine coffee, that the thing about watching someone die of organ failure is that you think about all the organs you have that are doing fine, and what a shame it is that you can only use them for yourself. Her co-worker had not known what to say to that. Renee had gone back to work. She had registered with the Kidney Donor Network 2 years after her mother passed. She had not told anyone. Not her sister Deb, not her friend Marcus, who lived 2 floors down and watched Chloe sometimes when Renee worked an extra shift. Not even her daughter. She put herself on the list the way she paid her electric bill, quietly, without drama, because it was the responsible thing to do. She got tested. She stayed on the list. She went back to sorting linens. The call came on a Wednesday morning in September, 3 years after she registered. A coordinator named Patrice said they had a match, critical priority, and asked if Renee was still willing. Renee sat down on the edge of her bed in her uniform, still smelling of industrial detergent, and said yes. She arranged for Marcus to take Chloe to school the day of the surgery and to pick her up afterward. She told Chloe she was having a minor procedure, that it was nothing to worry about, and that she would be home in a few days. Chloe was 9 and serious-eyed, the kind of child who absorbs information without broadcasting her reaction, and she looked at her mother for a long moment before she said, "Is it because of Grandma?" Renee had to look out the window for a second before she could answer. She said yes. Chloe nodded and picked up her backpack. The surgery took just under 5 hours. Renee came through without complications. She spent 4 days in the hospital and then 7 days at home on Deb's sofa because her sister had finally been told and had driven down from Trenton to help, furious, and then tender, and then furious again in the cycling way that sisters manage. Marcus brought groceries. Chloe sat beside her on the sofa and read aloud from a chapter book every evening, her voice steady and clear, the kind of companionship that does not ask anything from you. The hospital told Renee that the recipient was doing well. They could not tell her more than that. She said she understood and went home and went back to work. That winter was the hard one. She had known it might be, had planned for the recovery time, but planning and living are different things. The laundry facility held her job per the family and medical leave rules, but the 4 weeks she was out meant 4 weeks of no pay beyond the short-term disability payout, which covered 60% of her wages, which covered the rent and the utilities, and not much else. She borrowed $300 from Deb for Chloe's winter coat and her school pictures. She ate what she had and did not fill the cart past what she could count in her head at the register. She did not say any of this out loud to anyone in a way that asked for pity. She just moved through the winter the way she moved through most things, steadily, with her head up, spending what had to be spent and holding on to the rest. By February, she was back to full shifts and the account was slowly building again. She took on a Saturday overtime rotation for an extra $120 a week. The ache in her back was mostly gone. The scar from the laparoscopic incision was a thin white crescent below her left ribs, fading already. She had named it in her head privately, the thing I did. And sometimes when she was tired at the end of a long night, she would put her hand against it through her shirt and feel the faint ridge of it and think, somewhere out there, someone is better. She did not think about it as heroic. She thought about it the way she thought about paying her electric bill. She had no way of knowing that Lawrence Cole thought about it every single day. Lawrence Cole was 54 years old. He had grown up in Philadelphia in a row house with 6 siblings, the second eldest, the one who watched out for the younger ones, who helped his mother carry groceries, who worked at a tire shop from 16 until he could afford a single semester of community college, and then leveraged that semester into a job in warehousing logistics, and then leveraged that into a route management contract, and then leveraged that over 20 years of relentless, careful work into coal distribution, which moved freight for retail chains across 11 states and employed 932 people. He was a careful man. He was a methodical man. He did not make decisions without looking at them from every angle, and he did not forget what he owed. The dialysis had been the worst 18 months of his life. Not the physical mechanics of it, though those were brutal enough 3 times a week. 4 hours each session. His blood cycled through a machine while he sat and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the things he was not doing. The worst part was the shrinking. He was a man who had built something, who ran things, who showed up. And the disease had made him smaller, had taken the room he occupied in the world and reduced it, had made him a passenger in a body that was failing. His daughter Simone drove up every weekend. He told her she did not have to. She told him to stop talking and held his hand. The transplant had changed everything in the way that the return of a basic function always seems miraculous only in retrospect. He had woken in the recovery room feeling for the first time in nearly 2 years that the body was handling its own business. The doctors said he had a strong result. His numbers climbed week by week. By month 3, he was back at his desk. He was back. By month 5, he was travelling again. The scar from the surgery ran along his flank, and he had a habit of pressing his hand against it the way some people touch a lucky coin. He thought about the person who had given him the organ every day. He thought about it in the morning, and he thought about it when he ran his hand down the quarterly numbers, and thought about it when he watched Simone laugh at something on her phone across the restaurant table. The registry did not give him the donor's name. That was the protocol. Donors could choose to be contacted or not, and his donor had not initiated contact, which his coordinator told him was common, that many altruistic donors preferred to stay anonymous. Lawrence respected that. He held the anonymous gift the way you hold something too large to properly acknowledge, carefully and with a kind of ongoing debt that did not diminish. He asked Simone once, 6 months after the surgery, if she thought about it. She said she thought about it all the time. He asked her what she thought about when she thought about it. She said she thought about the fact that somewhere there was a person walking around with one kidney who had handed the other one to a stranger, and she did not know how you computed what you owed for something like that. Lawrence said he did not know either. They sat with that for a while. It was Simone who found Renee. Not through any official channel, not through the registry. What happened was smaller and stranger than that, the way the most load-bearing things often are. 18 months after the transplant, Simone was at a fundraiser for a hospital foundation in the city, the kind of event her father's company supported every year, held in a hotel ballroom with round tables and a live band and a silent auction along the far wall. She was there representing Cole Distribution because her father had a conflict that evening. She was doing her duty, making the rounds, saying the right things to the right people. Near the end of the night, she found herself talking to a woman named Patrice, a transplant coordinator from the hospital system, who mentioned in the course of the conversation that she had just come off a difficult case, a young child in kidney failure waiting on a paediatric match that was not coming fast enough. Simone said her father had received a kidney 18 months ago, altruistic donation, that it had saved his life. Patrice said she remembered that case. She said it was one of the cleanest matches she had seen in her career and that the donor had been extraordinary. She stopped there because the protocol held. She could not say more, but Simone was her father's daughter. She had his patience and his methodical habit of mind, and over the next 3 weeks she put together what she could from the fragments. The donation had come through the regional registry. The donor had been a woman. The timing, the transplant hospital, the compatibility markers her father's medical team had shared with him in general terms, all of it pointed to a narrow pool. She was not a private investigator. She was not reckless. She was a careful woman looking for a way to say thank you. She called the registry and asked if there was a mechanism for a recipient's family to express gratitude to a donor through an intermediary without violating anyone's privacy. The coordinator said there was, that it required the donor's consent to receive contact. Simone submitted the request. The letter came to Renee through the registry's intermediary service on a Thursday morning in March, 2 years and 4 months after the surgery. Renee was eating cereal at the kitchen table before her shift when she opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, in a controlled and deliberate script. It said that the writer's father had received a kidney donation 28 months ago. It said he was well, that he had returned to full health, that he ran the company he had built and travelled to see clients, and had danced at his company's holiday party in December, all things that had been taken from him and returned. It said the family had spent 2 years wanting to find the right way to say thank you, that they understood if she wanted no contact, that they would honour that completely. It closed with a name, Simone Cole. Renee sat with the letter for a long time. The cereal went soggy. She read it twice. The thing she felt was not pride or satisfaction exactly. It was something quieter, a kind of settling. The way a room feels when you find the thing you put down somewhere and forgot. She had known in the abstract that someone was better because of what she had done. The letter made it concrete. He had danced at a party in December. She held that. She had not planned to respond. She had told herself, in the years since the surgery, that she had not done it for gratitude and did not need any to come back. But Chloe had been sick since February. Not a small sick. The kind that had started with a fever that would not break and had become, through a terrifying sequence of tests and referrals and a specialist's appointment that cost more than Renee's rent, a diagnosis of a heart valve irregularity that would require surgical repair. Chloe was 11 now. The cardiologist had used words like routine and correctable and very good outcomes, and Renee had sat in the office and heard those words and also heard the number attached to the procedure, the portion not covered by her insurance plan, which was a high-deductible plan from her employer that she had chosen because it was what she could afford, and which now, facing a surgery on her daughter's heart, felt like a wall she had run into at full speed. The out-of-pocket share came to $41,000. She had $1,100 in savings. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter from Simone Cole, and she thought about her daughter's heart. She wrote back 3 days later. She wrote that she was glad the letter had come. She wrote that she was glad his health had returned. She did not mention Chloe. She wrote simply, plainly, that she hoped things continued well for the family, and that the letter had meant a great deal to her, and that she did not require anything in return. She signed her name. The letter she sent was the only honest version of herself she knew how to write. It did not ask for anything because she was not a person who asked. But Simone Cole read what was between the words. She was her father's daughter. She called him that evening and she said, "I found her, and I think she is in trouble." Lawrence Cole had not built a distribution company from a tire shop by being slow to act. He asked Simone to find out what she could through the intermediary, through any lawful and respectful channel. What Simone came back with over the following 2 weeks was enough. A name, a city, A child named Chloe with a heart condition and a mother who sorted linens at night and had $1,100 in a bank account. No one had handed any of this to them. It had come through care and attention and a family that had been paying a debt in their hearts for 2.5 years, and now, finally, had a name to attach to it. Lawrence called his chief financial officer and his personal attorney on the same afternoon. He said he needed to move a specific sum to a specific purpose, cleanly and without spectacle, and he named the amount. The attorney said, "Are you sure about the number?" Lawrence said he was very sure about the number. Renee learned about it on a Wednesday evening when she got home from her shift at 7 in the morning, changed out of her uniform, and found a voicemail from a number she did not recognize. The message was from a woman who identified herself as representing the Cole family and asked if Renee could call at her convenience. The voice was professional and warm, and it said the family wanted to express their gratitude in a way that was meaningful and that they hoped she would allow them to. She called back from the parking lot of the apartment building, sitting in her car in the thin morning light, her hands steadier than she felt. The woman on the line was Simone's attorney, and she explained, carefully and with no excess, what the family wanted to do. Renee listened without speaking. The woman told her the figure. Renee pressed her hand flat against the window glass, very cold. She said, "I didn't write to ask for anything." The attorney said she knew that. She said that was exactly why the family was asking. Renee said she needed a day. She sat in the car for 20 minutes after she hung up. The sky was pale, and the parking lot was quiet, and there was a sparrow on the chain-link fence near the dumpster, watching her with its small, bright eye. She thought about her mother. She thought about the form she had signed in that plastic chair 7 years ago, in her careful, deliberate cursive, the way she had folded her hands and said she was ready. She thought about Chloe in the hospital bed after the echocardiogram, how she had looked at Renee with those serious dark eyes and had not cried, only reached for her mother's hand. She thought about what it means to give something without expecting it returned, and what it means when the world insists on returning it anyway. She called the attorney back the next morning and said yes. The payment went directly to the hospital billing department. $41,000 cleared in full, covering Chloe's procedure and the 6 weeks of follow-up care and the medication regimen the cardiologist had prescribed. The billing coordinator called Renee to confirm the balance was zero. Renee said, "Zero." The coordinator said, "Zero." Renee had to put the phone down for a moment. When she picked it back up, she said, "Thank you," and the coordinator said, "You're welcome," not knowing really what she was witnessing on the other end of the line. Chloe's surgery was in April. A pediatric cardiac surgery team, the best in the region, the cardiologist had told Renee, and now there was no reason to settle for anything else. Renee sat in the family waiting room for 4 hours and 40 minutes. She had brought the letter from Simone, the original, the 2 handwritten pages in their envelope, and she held it in both hands across her lap for most of that time. She did not read it again. She just held it. Lawrence Cole had wanted to come. Simone had passed along the question, gently, and Renee had said she was grateful but that she needed the day to be small. He had respected that. What he had done instead was send a card through Simone, a plain white card with nothing on the front, and inside it, in his deliberate script, he had written only, "She will be fine. I know it in a way I cannot explain. Thank you for letting us be here in the only way we could." Renee had read that card 4 times on the morning of the surgery and had folded it into her coat pocket and carried it in there. The surgeon came out to the waiting room at 2:17 in the afternoon and said Chloe had done beautifully, that the repair was clean, that she was in recovery and asking for her mother. Renee stood up and said, "She is asking for me." The surgeon smiled and said, "Yes." Chloe was small in the hospital bed, wired and pale, but her eyes were open and they were Chloe's eyes, steady and serious and fully present. She looked at her mother and said, "I knew you'd be sitting out there." Renee sat on the edge of the bed and took her daughter's hand, the one without the IV, and held it in both of hers. She did not say anything for a moment. She just breathed. 6 months later, Lawrence Cole and Simone came to the city. Renee had said yes to a meeting, a real one, in person, for the first time. They chose a diner on a quiet block, nothing fancy. A round booth in the back, afternoon light coming in through the window. Chloe was there. She was recovered fully, cleared by her cardiologist, back in school and playing in the gym with her class during recess for the first time in a year. She sat next to her mother and studied Lawrence Cole with the particular frankness of a 12-year-old who has been through something and come out the other side. Lawrence Cole was a tall man, broad through the shoulders with close-cropped silver at his temples and a steady way of occupying space. He sat across from Renee and looked at her for a moment without speaking, the way people look at each other when language is not quite large enough for the occasion. Then he said, "I have been trying to figure out what to say to you for 3 years," Renee said. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I know. I want to." He told her what the dialysis had been like. He told her what it had felt like to wake up in the recovery room and understand that his body was working again. He told her that he pressed his hand against the scar every morning, a habit he could not shake, as a kind of reminder that someone had given him this. His voice was even and controlled, and at one point it was not quite even. And he stopped and looked at his water glass, and Simone put her hand on his arm. Renee watched him. She thought about her mother. She thought about the form in the plastic chair. She thought about how the world is always moving in directions you cannot see from where you are standing, carrying the things you sent out quietly into it. And sometimes, if you are patient and if you are fortunate, it brings them back to you in a shape you could not have imagined. Chloe, who had been quiet through most of this, said to Lawrence Cole, "Did it hurt, the surgery?" He looked at her with something that was not quite a smile and not quite not a smile. He said, "A bit. For a while." Chloe said, "Mine hurt for a while too," he said. "I know it did." She looked at him a moment longer, and then she looked at her mother, and Renee put her arm around her daughter and held her close. There, in the warm booth, the afternoon light falling across the table in a broad, pale stripe. That winter, Renee took a new position, a facility manager role at the laundry company, a promotion she had been passed over for twice in 3 years. She got it because she applied again, methodically and without drama, because she had always been the most reliable person in the building, and because the new regional director had actually read her file this time. The salary was $18,000 more per year. It was not a Cole family arrangement, it was just finally the right person reading the right file at the right time. She got the call on a Thursday and sat at her kitchen table and said, "Yes, I accept." And then, after she hung up, she sat there for a moment in the quiet apartment and looked at the window that no longer looked into a brick wall because they had moved in the fall, a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor with a window that faced east and caught the morning light, and Chloe had a room of her own for the first time. The letter from Simone was on the shelf beside the kitchen window. She had put it there after the surgery, in its envelope, propped against the small clay pot where Chloe had planted a basil seedling in October that was now a thick, dark green sprawl reaching toward the glass. Renee looked at the letter, and she looked at the basil, and she looked at the morning light coming in across the sill. She thought about the scar below her left ribs, fainter now than it had ever been. She thought about Lawrence Cole pressing his hand against his own scar every morning in a house on the other side of the city. She thought about how a thing done quietly in a plastic chair can move through the world for years before it finds its way home. Chloe came into the kitchen in her school clothes, backpack on, eating a piece of toast, alive and whole, and 11 years old, and running. Renee looked at her daughter. She thought about everything, and she thought about nothing. She thought it was enough. It had always been enough. Kindness is not a transaction. Kindness is not a. It does not expect a receipt, but the world, in its slow and certain way, keeps the account, and it always, eventually, settles. If you have ever done something for someone without expecting anything in return, leave a comment below. This story is for every person who has quietly given what they had and trusted it to matter. There was a period in the months after the surgery, after Chloe's diagnosis had come through and before the letter from Simone, when Renee had developed a habit she did not recognize in herself at first. She would finish her shift at the laundry at 5 a.m, drive home in the dark, sit in the parking lot of the apartment building for 10 or 15 minutes before she went upstairs. She was not crying. She was not exactly despairing. She was doing the math. She had been doing the math for months, and the math always came out the same way, a number with a deficit attached to it, a gulf she could not cross by working harder or spending less or asking Deb for more than Deb had to give. The cardiologist had been clear. The valve irregularity was structural. It was not going to correct itself. Left unrepaired, it would worsen, and the trajectory the doctor had described in careful clinical language was a trajectory Renee did not allow herself to think about directly. She thought about it sideways in the parking lot in the dark, her hands on the steering wheel, the engine cooling. She thought about what she had already given and whether she had anything left to give. She thought about Chloe's serious eyes and the way she had reached for her mother's hand after the echocardiogram without making a sound. Renee had applied for 2 medical assistance programs and been denied for both, her income landing just above the threshold. She had looked into medical financing and understood what the interest rate would do to a balance of $41,000 over 5 years. She had called the hospital billing office and asked about financial hardship arrangements and been told to submit an application that would take 8 to 10 weeks to process, and that might reduce the balance by a percentage they could not estimate in advance. She had submitted the application. She was waiting. She had not told Chloe any of this. Chloe knew she needed surgery. She did not know about the number or the application or the parking lot mornings, or the way her mother sat very still sometimes at the kitchen table, working through sums in her head that never resolved. Renee protected her daughter from the financial architecture of the hardship the way she had always protected her from it, not by pretending it did not exist, but by refusing to let it become Chloe's burden. The child's job was to heal and grow. Her mother's job was to find the money. Those were the terms. She had been prepared in the way you prepare for something you cannot fully face, to borrow against the only thing she had left to borrow against, which was the next 3 years of her wages, which was what the financing company had offered at 19%. She had not signed. She had come close. She had come so close that the pen was in her hand and the cursor was on the signature field, and then she had closed the browser and gone to bed and stared at the ceiling and prayed, which she did not do often, but which she did that night without strategy or performance, just the plain, honest request of a person who had run out of other options. 3 days later, she had written back to Simone Cole. She had written the plain, honest letter that didn't ask for anything, because she could not ask for anything, because that was not who she was. She had not known, writing it, whether it mattered. She had done the right thing because it was the right thing, and because she did not have a second version of herself available to do otherwise. Marcus, who watched Chloe sometimes and knew Renee's face better than she knew herself, had asked her one evening in February whether she was all right. She had said she was fine. He had said she did not look fine. She had said she would be fine, eventually. And he had looked at her with that quiet, particular look he had and said he was going to make her a plate, and she did not have to talk about anything. He had made her a plate. She had eaten it at his kitchen table while Chloe did homework in the next room, and she had not talked about anything. What she had felt in that hour was what dignity feels like when it is attended to without being asked about. She had felt held, briefly, in the plain warmth of someone who cared without requiring her to perform gratitude. She thought about Marcus when Simone's attorney called. She thought about how the world is full of people who show up quietly in the specific, ordinary way that does not make the news and does not ask for recognition and does not add to anyone's debt. She thought about how she had been trying her whole adult life to be that kind of person. She thought about the forms signed in the plastic chair. She thought about Marcus and her dinner plate and Chloe's homework and the particular ordinary grace of a life held together by people who are faithful to each other. She said yes because she had been that person, because she had earned the right to be helped by virtue of never making the help conditional on anything, least of all on the help coming back. She said yes because Chloe needed the surgery and the money was real, and refusing it would have been a performance of pride she could not afford, and she had never confused dignity with performance. She said yes because her daughter's heart needed fixing, and that was the only thing that mattered. The surgical team was led by a woman named Dr. Patricia Warren, who had done this specific repair over 300 times and who explained to Chloe, the morning of the surgery, exactly what would happen and why and what it would feel like afterward, in terms clear enough for a 12-year-old and precise enough for an adult. Chloe had asked one question. She asked if her heart would sound different afterward if you put your ear to it. Dr. Warren had looked at her with visible delight and said, "Maybe a little more even, like a clock that's been fixed." Chloe had said, "Good." That was the last thing she said before they took her back. Renee had sat in the waiting room and held the letter and the card and breathed. She had thought about Lawrence Cole at a holiday party in December, dancing. She had thought about what it feels like to be told your heart sounds more even, like a clock that has been fixed. She had thought about her mother, who had not had anyone to fix what was failing in her. She had thought about the 7 years between her mother's death and this plastic chair in this waiting room, the 7 years of sorting linens and paying bills and raising her daughter and carrying the things she had done without telling anyone. And she had thought, you do not know when you give something what it will grow into. You cannot know. You just give it and trust. The surgeon came out at 2:17, and Renee stood up from her chair, and her knees were not entirely steady, and she pressed her hands flat against her thighs to hold herself. Dr. Warren said Chloe had done beautifully, and the repair was clean, and she was in recovery and asking for her mother. Renee said, "She is asking for me," and the surgeon said yes with a warmth that was neither professional nor performed, just the genuine warmth of someone who had fixed something that needed fixing and was glad to report it. In recovery, the room was soft with low light and the sound of monitors and the particular hush of a hospital floor in the afternoon. Chloe was pale and small and wired, and her eyes were open, and they were immediately, completely, recognizably Chloe. She said, "I knew you'd be sitting out there." And Renee sat on the edge of the bed and took her daughter's hand and did not say anything for a long moment because she was using the moment to make sure she was fully inside it, fully present, not storing it as a memory but living it, this specific warm, particular moment. Her daughter's hand in both of her own, the monitors running their quiet, steady rhythm, the faint hospital smell, the sound of someone's cart rolling down the corridor outside, and her daughter's hand, warm, alive, fixed. She had given a piece of herself 7 years ago to a stranger she would never meet. The stranger had become a man she knew by name. The man had become the reason her daughter was alive in a hospital bed with a repaired heart asking for her mother. That was the ledger, if you needed to see it in those terms. Renee did not need to see it in those terms. She needed only to hold her daughter's hand. The rest was just the world doing what the world does when you trust it with your best self. It keeps a record, even when you do not.